So we are getting ready to start into our genetics unit. And we, due to some time restrictions and everything with this virtual learning, we are only going to do the Mendelian type of inheritance. So just your basic Punnett squares. And these are things that you learned when you were in 7th grade, if you were in the state of North Carolina. Hopefully at some point, wherever you were, you did already kind of go through some basic genetics terms. So this is kind of a review of that with just a little bit more inserted into it as well. All right, so let's real quickly go over the principles of heredity. And I am going to kind of annotate on this slide as we go through. So let's get a color on here. All right, so we've got 3 principles of heredity. Our father of genetics, Gregor Mendel, studied these pea plants. He was a monk, and he basically was in charge of the garden and started studying all these different traits that he saw passed down from parent to offspring in pea plants. And this is how he came up with these 3 basic principles of heredity. So the principle of dominance is the very first one, and this basically states that some traits are more dominant than others. And when you think of dominance, you need to think of one overpowering the other. So when we think of the principle of dominance, we notice that there is we represent dominant traits with an uppercase letter and recessive traits with a lowercase letter. All right, so we've got our dominant traits with our uppercase letter, our recessive traits are going to be represented by a lowercase letter. All right, so this principle of segregation is the second one. I'm just going to kind of real quickly go through these. And this basically just means that you get half of your DNA from your mom, and you get half of your DNA from your dad. And this is why you have a combined kind of look with your parents' traits. So you don't get 3/4 from mom and 1/4 from dad, or so on and so forth. You get exactly half from mom and half from dad. All right, and we're going to see these kind of shown out on questions, much so like this. So we have a cell, it goes through meiosis, and then say this is the original parent cell. We talked about meiosis making gametes, so maybe this is a sperm cell, makes a couple different sperm cells. One sperm cell is going to have the dominant allele, one's going to have the recessive. So then you're going to get an egg from mom, and that may be like this. And so then you end up with 2 possible traits. All right, the principle of independent assortment basically says that your genes are passed independently from each other. So your genes are passed separately from each other. So this is why your brothers and sisters, if they are full-blood brothers and sisters, look slightly similar to you and then slightly different as well. All right, so let's go to this next slide. All right, so some basic genetics vocab. Let me quickly go through these. So a trait is basically any type of inherited characteristic. I'm going to see if my stylus is right on the screen again. Nope. All right, so these are inherited characteristics. These are things like your eye color, your hair color, whether you can roll your tongue, whether your earlobes are attached, whether your thumb goes all the way back like a hitchhiker's thumb. And these are really cool. All right, an allele is basically the letter that represents that trait. So you get one allele from mom, you get one allele from dad. So like in the previous one, you get a big A or you get a little A. All right, our phenotype, and you should think P, is our physical appearance of a trait. All right, so our physical appearance would be like brown hair. Our genotype is the genetic appearance or the genetic way that we write it. So the genetic write, well, I'm gonna say writing, that's the best way to kind of describe it. All right, and this would be what we use the letters for. So say brown hair is represented by a big B, or it's represented by a big B and a little b. So whenever you see letters, you need to think genotype. Whenever you see a full-blown word, you need to think phenotype. All right, some other characteristics or some other vocab I want to go We've got dominant, which is always the one that overpowers the other traits. All right, the recessive one is the trait that is hidden. When we represent dominant traits, we represent them with a capital letter. So this would be something like a big B. All right, our recessive traits are represented by a lowercase letter. So that would be little b. All right. When we start going into more of our genetics problems, it's going to say stuff like homozygous and heterozygous, and we need to break down the root words for that. All right, so homo means same, right? So homozygous means same, and this would be represented by two of the same size letters. So whenever we write out a genotype, we always use two letters. We use two alleles. So one allele would be big B, the other allele would be big B as well. All right, so homozygous can be written as two different ways. So we can write it as big letter, or we can write it as two recessive letters. All right, this takes us back to this right here. So in order to see a recessive trait, you have to have two recessive alleles. If you don't, it's just hidden. All right, so for example, if we were using brown hair might be represented by big B, which would show us brown hair. It might also be represented, because brown hair is dominant, by big B, little b. Notice that there's a big B there. It's always going to make brown hair. And then if we want to show blonde hair, it's going to be the recessive. So you have to have two little b's in order to show that trait. All right, so now let's look at this. We've got homozygous here. Well, what does this word heterozygous mean? Heterozygous means different. All right, so this is where your big B, little b comes into play. So if it ever says somebody is heterozygous, you're always going to think big letter, little letter. All right, so let's do a little practice. So for each genotype, remember that genotype is the letters, the genes that make up a particular trait. You're going to indicate whether it is heterozygous, meaning that it has two different alleles, or homozygous, meaning that it has the same alleles. All right, so let's do this one real quick. Big A is going to have the exact same size, so it's going to be homozygous, and we're going to represent it with the letter H-O. So we don't have to write out the whole word. All right, let's look at this one right here. Big B, little b. These are two different sizes, so it's going to be written as heterozygous. This is a heterozygous genotype. All right, little f, they're the same size. Homozygous, same. We're going to write homozygous there. Big J, little j. Notice that those are different, so that's going to be heterozygous. All right, big E, little e is going to be different, so they are heterozygous as well. And then it is up to you to determine what that big M, little m would be. All right, for the next one, we're going to be looking at the phenotypes for a particular genotype. So it gives us the letters, and we're going to tell what the trait would be. So this one says that purple flowers are dominant to white flowers, meaning that whenever we see a capital letter, meaning dominant, it's going to show us purple. In order to show white, it's going to be recessive, and if you remember back, you have to have two recessive alleles in order to show the recessive trait. So for the first one, big P, notice that those are both dominant letters. They're both capital letters. All right, so this flower is going to be purple. All right, for the second one, big P, little p, notice that we still have a dominant letter. The dominant is always going to overpower. So this flower is purple as well. So now looking at this very last one, we've got two recessive alleles. All right, so the phenotype for this one should be what? All right, let's practice with a little bit more. All right, so this is kind of backwards from what we did before. We are going to use the letter of the dominant trait to show that straight hair is dominant to curly hair. And I like to use something other than an S when we start to do these because S is a little hard to tell the difference between a capital and a lowercase. So we're going to use H for hair. All right, so straight hair is dominant. So anytime that we see straight hair, we're going to have a big H. Dominant to curly hair. Curly is the recessive, so we're going to use a lowercase h. All right, so straight homozygous hair will be represented by the two letters big H. Because it is homozygous, they have to be the same size and it's dominant. All right, straight hair heterozygous. Whenever you see heterozygous, there's only one option. So big H, little h. All right, and then I want you to do the last one yourself. So curly hair is recessive homozygous. So it should be what two letters? All right, the next little thing that we're going to talk about is something referred to as nature versus nurture. And nature versus nurture is basically just this idea that your genes and the environment that you were raised in plays a part in how you have certain characteristics. All right, so nature is your DNA. Nurture is your environment. All right, and scientists think that this is so incredibly interesting because they've been studying twins. Okay, and these are twins that have identical genes. So when we start talking about this, we're talking about identical twins. All right, not just brother and sister like fraternal twins, identical twins. All right, so notice baby A and baby B are genetically identical. They look exactly the same. All right, if we were to split these two babies up, much so like Parent Trap or one of those old movies where kind of they were switched at birth or whatever. And then one of these babies was raised in a loving household with very educated parents versus baby B that went to live in a household where it was it was an angry family, maybe a less educated individuals that raised them. All right. This is going to possibly determine how baby A reacts to the world versus baby B, even though they have the exact same genes. So this is so important to learn about because we see how powerful your genetic DNA traits are versus the environment in which you were raised in. All right, so we're going to get a little bit of practice with some Punnett squares, and these Punnett squares are an easy way to figure out how these traits are passed down from mom to dad. So I'm going to use two different colors, and I only have about 2 minutes left on this video, so I'm going to try to move pretty quickly. All right, so it says brown hair is dominant to blonde hair color. We're going to use the letter B to represent brown hair. So we're going to cross a heterozygous brown-haired person with a blonde person. So say dad is heterozygous brown hair. We're going to use big B. Actually, let's say mom since I just wrote in pink. It's a little bit easier. Heterozygous brown hair. All right, and maybe dad is blonde. All right, so blonde is recessive, so it's going to be little b, little b. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to pull these squares or pull these letters down into their appropriate squares. I always like to go top to bottom first. All right, so these ones on top are going to move down into their respective squares. So we're going to put a big B here and a big B here. All right, this little b is going to move down. I'm going to put a little b there, little b there. Whenever we write stuff, we're always going to write it with a capital letter first. All right, so now going to our male genes, which is blonde, we're going to pull these B's across. So this B is going to go here, this B is going to go here, this one here, and this one here. Notice that they went straight across in their rows. All right, so now looking at this, we're looking at a probability out of 100%. So each square is going to be worth 25% or 1/4. All right, so the probability for an offspring with brown hair. Let's do a little highlighter. All right, and find all the ones that have brown hair. Well, brown hair is dominant, so this one has brown hair and this one has brown hair. So 2 out of 4 would leave us with a probability of 1/2. All right, the probability for an offspring with blonde hair, on the other hand, are only these two. Once again, 1/2. All right, so it is 50% probability that the baby will have brown hair and a 50% probability that the baby will have blonde hair. And what we do is we take this and we start to see what the inheritance of traits look